The Secretary will read.
Legislative Resolution Number 4325 by Senator Comrie, mourning the death of the Honorable Barbara M. Clark, the New York State Assemblywoman of the 33rd Assembly District, distinguished citizen and devoted member of her community. Whereas, it is the custom of this legislative body to mourn publicly the death of certain prominent individuals whose valued contributions to the community, their profession, serve to enhance the quality of life in the state of New York. And whereas, with feelings of deepest regret, this legislative body must record the passing of one of New York State's most dignified citizens, the Honorable Barbara Marlene Clark, who died on Monday, February 22nd, 2016, at the age of 76. And whereas Barbara M. Clark was born on June 12, 1939, in Beckley, West Virginia. She was first elected to the New York State Assembly in November of 1986, representing the constituents of the 33rd Assembly District in Queens, New York. And whereas Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark served as a tireless advocate of the needs of children, families, and the elderly, her warm spirit and her firm belief that we all have a responsibility to defend the well-being of our fellow citizens will be remembered by many. And whereas an effective leader in education reform, daycare, and community development, Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark devoted much of her time to creating institutions, policies, and programs, all designed to foster stability and growth within the 33rd Assembly District. And whereas, as a leading advocate for parents having a statutory role in education policy making, Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark was a primary sponsor of the 1996 New York City School Governance Law, which mandates parental involvement in decision making. And whereas, she has been unrelenting in her battle to change New York State's inadequate and inequitable school finance system, and was an early supporter of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity versus the State of New York lawsuit, which helped bring such inequities to the forefront. And whereas Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark continuously advocated for a better quality of life for senior citizens in the state of New York, she promoted legislation to safeguard seniors from financial exploitation, telemarketing fraud, and predatory lending. She also focused on safety, environmental, transportation, and land zoning issues. And whereas Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark, throughout her legislative career, held a variety of important positions, including Assistant Majority Whip, a member of the Majority Steering Committee, served on the Health Budget Conference Committee, and chair of the Education Committee of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. Furthermore, she chaired the Assembly Standing Committee on Aging, State and Federal Regulations, and the New York State Legislative Women's Caucus, a bipartisan organization of women legislators from both the Senate and the Assembly. And whereas, on the national level, Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark served as Vice Chair of the National Conference of State Legislators, Education, Labor, and Job Training Committee, and member of both the Human Services Committee and Education Partners. And whereas the Honorable Barbara M. Clark is survived by her husband, Thomas Clark, Jr., 4 children, Jan, Crystal, Thomas III, and Brian, and 2 daughters, Taylor and Lauren. And whereas a woman of great compassion and sensitivity, Assemblywoman Barbara M. Clark's legacy extends far beyond her accomplishments as a successful public servant. Her sincere concern for others, her integrity, unconditional friendship, and selfless motivation to give of herself will long stand as a beacon for those who would aspire to serve in their community. Now, therefore, be resolved that this legislative body pauses deliberations to mourn the death of the Honorable Barbara M. Clark, New York State Assemblywoman of the 33rd Assembly District, recognizing the significance of her exemplary record of public service, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution suitably engrossed be transmitted to the family of the Honorable Barbara M. Clark.
Senator Comrie.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all of the legislators and staff and all of the people that have reached out to myself and to the Clark family. Barbara Clark left us too soon on February 22nd of this year. You've heard the extensive obituary that was read by her. I just want to bring up some points. One correction, she's only survived by 3 children. Her daughter, Jan, her first child, unfortunately passed away about a year ago. And I think most of us feel that the loss of her daughter to cancer, as well as Barbara to cancer, tilted her over to the fact that she didn't want to fight anymore. But Barbara Clark was a natural-born fighter. Coming out of coal country in Berkeley, West Virginia, she was able to bring herself and her fiance, her childhood sweetheart, Thomas Clark. The Clark and the DeBerry families moved to New York together in 1961 and to Cambridge Heights in 1969. Barbara was elected to the Assembly after working as a student advocate, a child advocate, as working as a security guard, school safety supervisor, and a youth coordinator for the New York City Division of Youth Services. She ran as an insurgent. She beat the county candidate by working and by having a reputation in the community for working with parents and working with students. She was able to run as an insurgent, start her own club, develop her own base, and become a New York State Assembly member. She came here as an advocate for children and families. She came here as an advocate to try to change education. Her children went all through public education, through public schools, and she was determined to make sure that the schools in her community would be the best that they could be. Barbara was tireless in her attitude and focus. There was never a meeting that you could go to and you would not see Barbara be the last person to leave the room, the last person to argue with whoever was there on points and issues and policy, determined to make sure that everybody understood her feelings, her concerns, and her issues. Barbara stood in the Assembly and was one of the few people to try to challenge leadership when she first got to the Assembly, and paid a heavy price for her leadership to stand fast, even when the ship had sailed and the opportunity for to change leadership had diminished. She wanted to make her own individual point that she was not happy about what was going on and how people were being treated. She paid a heavy price for that, but she was determined to make sure that her voice was heard. She took that opportunity also to make sure that in education reform, she was part of the campaign for fiscal equity, a 13-year fight that is still going on to try to make sure that school funding is fair for schools. Barbara did not hesitate to go deep and go long on issues that she was concerned about. She would not hesitate to go into details and find out all of the nuances about any issue that she cared about, be it a local problem, be it a zoning issue, be it any issue that she thought needed to be delved into. Barbara in her office would be the first to get the details, first to get all of the facts, and the first to make sure that she knew and that everybody around her knew exactly what was her concern, how she would fight it, and how she would defend the community. Oftentimes it was Barbara herself going to knock on a constituent door when they had a problem. Oftentimes it was Barbara herself that would write the letters or make the opportunities to ensure that people directly knew how she felt about a constituent issue or how she felt about policy. Barbara was the person that I was happy to have been tutored by and mentored by, even though I didn't support her originally when she ran. She eventually forgave me, and by the time I ran for office, was one of the first to support me in my run for city council. And when I told her I was running for state senator, she was the first elected official to tell me that she would endorse my campaign. You could depend on talking to Barbara for days and days on an issue. If you tried to get out of the room, she would block the door oftentimes if she didn't get all of her points across. She was truly a leader in our community. She was truly understanding all of the nuances of leadership and humility, because she never failed to do everything possible to show people that she was willing to make sure that if there was an issue to be done, she would do it from A to B. She will be missed in our community. We are looking hard to try to figure out how to find someone that can be a Barbara Clark, that can understand that you have to be humble as a legislator, that you have to have a purpose, that you have to be unrelenting in your focus, and that you have to understand that in order to get what you want, you have to have the preparation, you have to take the time, you have to do the research, and you have to be willing to push uphill for many years before you can have success sometimes, but to always do it with style, with panache, and with tenacity. I want to thank you, Mr. President, and thank all of the members also. There were over 40 members that have already agreed to sign on to this resolution, that have personally expressed their concerns and to the family. As I said, there was one mistake in the record. She lost Jan, her first daughter, and her mother, Ada DeBerry, who was an original fighter, is still alive and is still with us. And I want to just also express my condolences to a strong family and congratulate them for their strength and dignity during this time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hassel-Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to thank Senator Comrie for not only this resolution, but the words about a woman that I came to know and to like, but more importantly, to respect tremendously for her work here in the state legislature. Most of the points that I wanted to cover have been covered, but so I will just say to you, Leroy, that I'm very grateful for your knowledge of her and your opportunity for others to hear what a good legislator really ought to be about, and that's who Barbara Clark was. I remember coming to the state Senate 17 years ago, and she was still very vibrant and very excited about being in government. And sometimes I look at some of my colleagues, and they haven't been here nearly as long, and somehow they've lost the same verve. But she never lost that. Even up until the last days that she served, she continued to have a tenacity that is to be compared to none. But more than that, she stood her ground. If she committed to something, you knew she was totally committed. As Senator Comrie said, she took a hard beating because she stood up for what she thought was right. And she thought that the leadership in the Assembly was wrong, and she did not back down. There were a lot of people that I know that had committed, and at the last minute, they got back to safety. She didn't run to safety. She took her punishment. She accepted what came for the stance that she took. But as things were proven, she was right. She was right. And she stood for what was right, and I respected her so tremendously. Even as I watched her be stripped of her committees and whatever, it did not stop her from fighting for the people that she was elected to serve. And she did it with such a dignity that she was a role model for anyone who chose to pay attention. I was saddened when some of the young women who have just come into the Assembly said to me, we are losing all of our role models. And I was deeply concerned when I learned how ill she was and that she would not be returning. But I thank those of you who thought it not robbery to stay and to listen to this tribute to Barbara Clark. And I'm saddened by her loss because the whole state has lost a champion. The whole state has lost someone who just believed that every child had a right to be educated, who really fought very, very hard to make sure that every school in every district had the educational equipment, tools that every child needed to succeed in this society. And it did not matter to her what district you came from. She believed that every child in every district ought to be educated to the fullest of their capacity. And so she will be greatly missed, certainly by me, and those of good conscience will miss the role modeling as well as the kind of legislation that she pursued in the state legislature. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to add my tribute to a woman of distinction.
Senator Little.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd also like to thank Senator Comrie for bringing this resolution honoring Assemblywoman Barbara Clark to our chamber. I first met Barbara when I entered the Assembly in 1995, and I must say that she was one of the friendliest and best legislators that I encountered while I was in the Assembly. She was so well-spoken, she was so dedicated to her family and to her community, but more than that, she was totally dedicated to the children of New York City especially, you can't deny that, but really to every child. And as Senator Hassel-Thompson said, she was really and truly concerned that the children who were going to school in our state were actually getting an education. And she was not afraid to be critical of what was happening or what wasn't right. But I admired her very, very much, and I felt very privileged to have known her. And I certainly am saddened by her loss. She was one to be remembered. She was a lovely lady and a great legislator. Thank you.
Senator Robach.
Mr. President, let me thank Senator Comrie for the very fitting resolution, and I would concur. Barbara Clark certainly was somebody who was not only noted for fighting for education for everybody, recognized that education was a ladder up no matter where you came from in this world, and fought for young and old alike. And I would just add on her record side, before I get to a little personal story, Barbara Clark also would not only take to task anybody who disagreed with her, she stood up to leaders at a time when it was very, very rare in this body or in the other house in particular for anybody to stand up to leaders. I might even go so far to say she was ahead of the curve and she was right. But on a personal note, I wanted to just share, I got the privilege in my assembly days to spend a lot of time on what we might call quasi-social business things with Barbara. And oftentimes, when we go to New York City for the Intrepid Museum or Cooperstown for the induction, I would take my children who were very, very young. And they loved Barbara and Tom Clark. To put it mildly, Barbara loved life, she liked snacks, and so did my children. And if Tom and Barbara went to get ice cream cones, she brought them back for my kids. Anytime we ate at a restaurant, if I said to my kids, "You don't need a milkshake," she would say, "Come on, we're on vacation. Let them have the milkshake." So even to this day, my children are in their late 20s, they still talk about Barbara Clark's warmth, and that was the kind of person she was. She really loved all kinds of people, and I think that's what I will remember about her. She was not only a great legislator, but she was really a warm and great human being, and was a fighter, but also was a lover of all things good. And to her family, I just want to say there's many, many people and our families that appreciated their input in getting to know the Clarks. She definitely made a mark on not only New York City, but Albany and people across the state. May she rest in peace.
Senator Stafisky.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Comrie, for explaining the real Barbara Clark. Barbara and I have knew each other. I hate to use the past tense. Barbara and I knew each other for many years. We stayed at the same hotel. We had dinner together quite often. And she would be the last one to come to dinner because she stayed at the Democratic conference until everybody had left. She actually sat through every meeting of the Democratic conference in the Assembly until it was over because she wanted to learn about everything that was going on throughout the state. She was especially proud of her family. Her mother, who is still very active in the community on the board of Queens Hospital Center. When she was honored, I was proud to be there. Her son, her daughters. She would describe growing up in Beckley, West Virginia, and how difficult it was. And when she and Tom got married, he was in the service, they came back to New York, and Barbara became active in community affairs, particularly education. And there's no doubt that Andrew Jackson is a good school today because of Barbara Clark for everything that she did at Andrew Jackson. But her family was important, but the issues were important to her. She was concerned about so many, many areas, and she enjoyed learning, she enjoyed explaining things, and rarely do you see somebody whom you can say is a good person. I never heard Barbara say anything mean about anybody. And if you take a look at the pictures that appeared in the newspapers after she passed away, there's a smile on every picture. because Barbara was always smiling. She was upbeat. She enjoyed food. We used to, occasionally, she had a favorite restaurant on the other side of the river, and we would go over there and have some soul food. She was always happy, and her daughter spoke at her funeral. And again, you could see the genes there. The daughter spoke in the same, it's as though her daughter was making everybody else feel good, the way Barbara made everybody feel good. So I thank Senator Comrie, and the fact that people on both sides of the aisle spoke today, I think, is a testimony to Barbara's goodness and decency and hope for the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is on the resolution. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Resolution is adopted. Senator Marchione.
Senator Comrie would like to open the resolution up for co-sponsorship. Can we please place everyone on as a co-sponsor? If someone does not wish to be a co-sponsor, they should notify the desk.
The resolution is open for co-sponsorship. If you do not wish to be a co-sponsor, please notify the desk. Senator Marchione.
I believe there's a resolution by Senator Hassel-Thompson, 4306, at the desk. I ask that the title be read only and ask for its immediate adoption and call on Senator Hassel-Thompson.
Secretary will read.
Legislative Resolution number 4306 by Senator Hassel-Thompson, recognizing Thursday, March 10, 2016 as Harriet Tubman Day.
Senator Hassel-Thompson.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I rise to pay tribute to Harriet Tubman. I'm sorry that the resolution was not read in its entirety, but certainly just a few words for those who may not know who Harriet Tubman was. She was a person who herself was held in captivity and bound in unpaid, back-breaking labor from the time of her birth until she was able to escape. When she managed to escape that life, in her turn, she was able to free others who were still trapped in that situation. She made 19 trips back and forth to the South and succeeded in rescuing over 300 slaves using the Underground Railroad. She chose to sacrifice her life and freedom each time she returned to liberate a group of slaves. Not only did she secretly free hundreds of slaves, but she worked as a nurse as well as a spy scout, armed scout for the Union Army during the American Civil War. In the Combahee River Raid, she was able to lead 150 black Union soldiers, and between them, they freed 700 South Carolina slaves in one day. After the Civil War, she came north and she worked alongside Susan B. Anthony to promote women's suffrage. Tubman acted in the shadows to save her fellow human beings from the torment that she endured. Therefore, this resolution is to pay tribute to her for her commitment and extraordinary courage, which led to the freedom of thousands of slaves, risking her own freedom and safety to protect that of others. She said once, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they had known they were slaves." She also said that every great dream begins with a dreamer. Remember always, you have within you the strength, if the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars and to change the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Montgomery.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to thank Senator Hassel-Thompson for introducing this resolution. It is very befitting that we celebrate a woman of the stature of Harriet Tubman. Certainly, we stand on her shoulders. She was one of those women who, in the way of saying, ain't I a woman too? Even though she had to fulfill all of the roles that were in those days allocated specifically to slaves and to slave women in particular. She became, for many of us, a soldier in an army to free her people. And for that, we must never forget her role and what she meant and who she was in our history, in the history of America, in the history of African people in America, and for the history of women. And in fact, we now have what we hope to become a major museum in the western part of our state that will be dedicated to her life and her activities as a person who was part of the Underground Railroad movement, which is very much a part of New York State's history. And it was, in fact, it will be on land that was, I believe, given to her by a former Secretary of State, William Seward, who resided also upstate New York. And so we will all have a monument to the legacy and the activities and the life of Harriet Tubman. So again, thank you, Senator Hassel-Thompson, and thank you, Mr. President.
The question is on the resolution. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Resolution is adopted. Senator Marchione.
Senator Hassel-Thompson would like to open this resolution for co-sponsorship, so if we could place everyone on as a co-sponsor. If someone does not wish to be a co-sponsor, they should notify the desk.
Resolution is open for co-sponsorship. If you do not wish to be a co-sponsor, please notify the desk. Senator Marchione.
I believe there's a resolution by Senator Serrano, number 4312, at the desk. I ask that the title be read only and ask for its immediate adoption and call on Senator Serrano.
The Secretary will read.
Legislative Resolution number 4312 by Senator Serrano, memorializing Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to declare 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. on Saturday, March 19, 2016, as Earth Hour in the state of New York.
Senator Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a resolution that I put forth every year, and I think by now many of my colleagues are well aware of the importance of Earth Hour. It's an hour where we turn off all of our lights and non-essential electronics, and we do a tremendous amount of benefit on the issue of global climate change. So now this year, Earth Hour is happening this Saturday, March 19th, from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. So we're asking everyone to turn off their switches and conserve electricity and conserve energy as much as possible. Now, many might say that this is just a symbolic gesture, but actually they are worldwide. This is a worldwide phenomena, and it has a very positive effect in many countries. So from the Empire State Building in New York to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, to places like Dubai and Sydney, Australia, there will be this worldwide effort to turn off electricity. And folks make it into a big party. If you follow it on social media, you will see a lot of discussion about Earth Hour on the days leading up to it, and people have a lot of fun turning off their lights and being part of a worldwide movement to take back our environment, take back our climate. So a couple of facts. Last year, 172 countries and territories worldwide and over 10,000 iconic landmarks, including ones here like the Empire State Building, as I mentioned earlier, Niagara Falls, the Chrysler Building, turned off their lights to help make Earth Hour the world's largest grassroots movement for the environment. In addition to the symbolic display of Earth Hour, a 2014 study found that in 10 countries spanning 6 years, Earth Hour events reduced electricity consumption an average of 4%. Now that's just 1 hour. So imagine if this was something that we did on a regular basis. And I want to make sure people know that you're not limited to this 1 hour this coming Saturday night. If you miss it, there will be any opportunity you want to help make a dent in global climate change and make it a habit to use less, to consume less, to be aware of your carbon footprint. to be aware of products that you're using and how they will affect the environment. Think about modes of transportation that you're using. These are all the little things that when they all come together and you have millions of people participating in a very concerted way, you can have a lasting positive effect on the environment. So this resolution will ask the governor to memorialize Earth Hour this coming Saturday. I would like to open up this resolution for co-sponsorship for all my colleagues, and I hope everyone supports it. Thank you.
The question is on the resolution. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The resolution is adopted. Senator Marchione.
It's open for co-sponsorship, as the senator had asked while he
The
spoke.
resolution is open for co-sponsorship. If you do not wish to be a co-sponsor, please notify the desk. Senator Marchione.
There is no further business, so we move for adjournment until Wednesday, March 16th at 11 a.m.
On motion, the Senate stands adjourned until Wednesday, March 16th at 11 a.m.